All right, hello and welcome. Today is workbook lesson number 19. So I am not alone in experiencing the effects of my thoughts. So as you've probably already realized, this is very similar to the last one. And I think the best way to represent this situation is to draw it like this. Seeing as sort of the same thing as thinking is. This doesn't make sense to our sort of dualistic perception of the world, of like subjects and objects. But this is the reality because thoughts and seeing are basically the same. Your one kind of the thought sort of precedes, but the seeing could seemingly precede or follow. It's not necessarily intrinsically tied to like it's an effect, but it's not necessarily in the duration of time seen as always before or always afterwards. And that's something that we'll chat about here yet. So we're going to jump to the second paragraph here. The idea for today is obviously the reason why your seeing does not affect you alone. So as we were saying, thoughts and effects are not distinct. Keep in mind that there's a part of you that is in your mind attached to this collective mind. And the reason that we know that, and well, this will be a little bit of a diversion here, is that we have people that do so. And a good example is remote viewing. There's a guy named Russell Targ that talks about this a lot. He was in a program the United States military ran, and it ran successfully for I think over 20 years. And these people that were remote viewers could get sort of coordinates in their mind about what they had to go try to find, or they could get just an image of what they needed to see, and they could see where it was specifically in the world, and that wouldn't even be necessarily attached to time. So they could see something in the future, or they could see something in the past. Think of time and space as sort of this continuous construct. I don't know why I'm showing it like a elongated shape, but this doesn't necessarily have to be. But things that are in it are not necessarily happening sequentially. But you know what? Let's do it this way. Let's explain it this way. So you have a person that's moving, and this is one image, like a snapshot of a picture. And if you take that same image into 4 dimensions, you get that same person right next to it at this spot. And then you get another picture of that same person. And they don't even necessarily have to be moving in order for this to be true. Keep in mind that supposedly our solar system is moving, and consequently you have all these sort of images that are these distinct images all the way through time. And if you put them all together, it would be something that looks like the sort of snake-like shape. You have this sort of all fits together eventually, and it's this elongated shape that goes in time. And one of my own thoughts, we always have these association with snakes. And if you go to the Bible, we have the lies of the snake. And maybe the lies of the snake is the fact that we have this head and tail of your life. So your life starts at this small spot and then becomes this elongated thing, and eventually you become sort of decrepit and smaller and smaller and smaller, and you end up leaving the world. And maybe this is supposed to be just the representation of death. So that was a thought that I've had in the past, that these sort of 3-dimensional shapes that go through 4-dimensional time are sort of these elongated things that have beginnings and end, and that sort of looks like a snake, right? So these remote viewing incidences, you could see the person in this time, you could see the person in this time, and they're a distinct image in those little frames of time. However, that doesn't mean that they aren't all part of this whole continuous construct of which we're relating it to a snake. We're probably going to have a little bit of tension towards that notion, but something to think about. You'll notice at times that the ideas related to the thinking precede those related to, or ideas related to thinking precede those of perceiving, while at other times the order is reversed. The reason is that the order does not matter. Thinking against its results are really simultaneous, for cause and effect are never separate. So what do we mean by this? So if we look at this image, and keep in mind this is supposed to be in this big old cave, right? So we have light that's came into this world from an external source from up here, comes in, and this light is the only thing that is really true in this world. But we have this sort of projector situation that's putting out these Viking, and we have an inversion over here of a sort of victim. So I kind of like this way of relating it to, why do I keep doing that? Victim. So we have these two as basically one another. And maybe the best way to think about this, and this is how old projectors used to work, they had a reversed image that was shot onto a screen. So that's kind of helps my explanation here. And think about these two separate things as sort of this yin and yang situation. Keep in mind, what was it, spooky entanglement is what Einstein called it. And you had two photons split, and you had one sort of had a negative orientation to the positive orientation of the other one. And if you manipulated one, the opposite would happen with the other half of it that was once, you know, this sort of conclusive entity. And at times, the one that you're manipulating, the other one would react to the intentionality of the observer or whatever really happened, who knows. But the whatever you did to this one would anticipate what would happen to this one. So it would do the opposite of what was happening to this one before this one was even manipulated. And this is a really good example of how this is kind of true, right? Because the thinking and its results are sort of happening instantaneously to each other, and sometimes can't think of time as real, right? Time is kind of all happens at once. There's a belief of what happens sort of divorced of this sort of perception world where it perceives it in these little tiny slices, but they're not actually separate. So I hope that made this. Hope that makes sense. Today we are again emphasizing the fact that all minds are joined. This is rarely wholly welcome idea at first, since it seems to carry with it an enormous sense of responsibility, and it should. And that is an important sense of what's coming yet. So this sense of responsibility is that you are responsible for your thoughts, because your thoughts are always creating. And I'll just read a little further here so we can explain that better. And that may even be regarded as an invasion of privacy. So we see our own, yet this is the fact that there are no private thoughts. So we don't have private thoughts. And the belief that you do makes it so you think that your thoughts have no consequences. You think, oh, well, I can think whatever I want, right? We only punish people for what they do in the world, not what they think. If we punish people for everything they thought, we'd have a lot more people in jail probably. But the thought is the thing that you can control, and the action not always. And that's a point that the book will make quite often. And it reminds me sort of, again, I don't know the Bible as well as I know the Course in Miracles, but it reminds me of when Jesus was saying that doesn't matter if you, and of course I'm paraphrasing here, the cheating on your wife is not as big a thing as if you cheated in your mind on her already. So just your intentionality to do something, or to even have a thought of cheating, is the same as kind of doing, because they're going to be represented on some level. Your thoughts, and the Course says this as well, your thoughts will always have a consequence on some level. So we have to feel this responsibility. It's not something that we can take lightly. Despite your initial resistance to the idea, you will yet understand that it must be true if salvation is possible at all. So this will eventually be your saving grace, really, because it's going to be a way of, like, the fact that you're not excluded from it means that when you save yourself truly, that you'll save everyone else at the same time. I try not to think about this as bodies saving each other, but collective mind being healed at once. And that's why one person's contributions to this healing, the atonement, is really important. And salvation must be possible because it is the will of God. So that whole conclusive entity of time and space is already reality, and we're just experiencing it. So I want to talk about a little bit more about how these sort of perceptual loops happen in that. But there's only one true path to atonement and redemption, which is redemption to ourselves, because there's nothing to be forgiven really, because this is all sort of a dream world, I guess you could say. I was going to talk about Targ's program, what we just already talked about, but we already kind of chatted about it. So they can see these situations, and like I say, in the Cold War, they were able to locate a lot of these places that were areas of interest in the military, and we've already kind of talked about that, so we don't need to really harp on it anymore. But I was kind of thinking about it there today, and this is maybe a really apt picture of how thinking works. So we sort of believe that it's this closed system, like there's sort of thought bubbles that go into this cloud. And the interesting thing about a cloud is, maybe this is sort of an analogy for how this really happens. We sort of have the situation that seems to affect us, but really the cloud just goes into the atmosphere when the conditions are right? So it kind of adds to this overall thing, even though we think, and maybe this is a good way to relate the idea to thinking and the way it contributes to the overall psyche, because you're, like we say, you're either investing in one idea or the other. And this is interesting because I was talking about this the other day. Mother Teresa used to say that she would do marches for peace, but she wouldn't do marches against war. And if you think about that, that doesn't make much sense to a materialist. But somebody that sees the two sides and whether they're investing in one, so she's willing to invest in this pro-peace one, but she's not willing to invest in this anti-war one. Because keep in mind, this anti-war one is the Viking and victim one, right? So you're condemning the rest of the world, looking down on the rest of the world as not as good as you. Whereas this pro-peace one is just reaffirming what you already are, the truth of your situation, or the truth of your actual reality. All this stuff is cause-effect related, and if you see yourself as a Viking, you're going to see yourself as a victim, and if you see yourself as a victim, you're going to be a Viking at some point. Each of these lessons. So the minute or so of mind searching today's exercise required to be undertaken with eyes closed. The idea is to be repeated at first, and then the mind should be carefully searched for the certain thoughts that it contains at its time. As you consider each one, name it in terms of the person or the theme it contains, and hold it in your mind as you do say, I'm not alone in experiencing the effects of this thoughts about dish or cat or table. It doesn't really matter, right? So all of this is true. And the only thing I really want to highlight here before I quit talking about this situation is that, like I say, this is always true about everything. So the fact that you're doing this indeterminately, this indiscriminateness, is another way of attacking the situation of order of miracles. So like no miracle, moving a pen with your mind is no different than bringing somebody back from the dead, like really, because keep in mind that you made death. So that those snakes in the world that you make, where you believe that somebody's born and dies, that we talked about, you can as easily undo that by removing your investment in it. So you've invested in that idea because you believe it's true, and that reaffirmation will be something that you'll need to get rid of at some point, because order of the difficulties in miracles is not real, and this is a way to get at this indirectly. So the fact that we're looking at everything with the same indiscriminateness is really reinforcing that same idea. Anyway, it's all written here. You can read it on your own. I'm sure you guys have the book too. So go through this. I don't want to take up too much more time, but good luck to you, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.